Hey everyone, welcome again to the Questioning Behaviour podcast. My name is Merle and I'm one of your co-hosts, and as always I'm here with Sarah Bowen.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you for that lovely intro.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying.
Today I'm quite excited to jump into the topic. Well, to be quite fair, I'm always excited to jump into the topic, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. But we are talking to Jo Evershed, so spoiler alert, but we are talking much more about a methodological aspect of behavioral science. And we are actually talking about moving your shit online. Because we're in a pandemic and you will have to. You don't really have a choice. So how's that working out for you, Sarah?
Yeah. This is the question of how do you collect data in a pandemic as a behavioral scientist? How do you run experiments? And good for us that we were born in this modern age where it is actually possible to run experiments, really rigorous, good quality, reliable, well-crafted experiments online and collect that data, which is really important. Because otherwise, there's no way we can run anything in the lab. We can't invite people to studies in person. And so, yeah, the online study is queen right now, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think... So I have to admit, like, beyond Qualtrics and, the prolific platform, I don't really do that much online. So when the pandemic hit, one of my studies had to be shifted online. The other study would always have been online anyway, because I'm just presenting people with a bunch of stimuli, and I'm like, which one do you remember? It's not that hardcore. I had no intention of ever running that in a lab to begin with. The other one I was quite annoyed about because it's a grocery store type experiment. And I was like, how am I shifting this online? But, so far so good. And only the recruitment and assignment process is online because thankfully people are still allowed to go into grocery stores. But I think your stuff was a bit more intense to shift online.
Yeah. Let's just say that, you can't really just take a randomized controlled trial in the field and stick that online. You have to make some adjustments, and that's just what I've had to do. It's part of being a PhD student in the pandemic. You have to adapt a little bit more, and that's what it is. But I think with my experience with online experiments, I've relied quite heavily during my PhD on data collection on them, and I've dabbled in Qualtrics to create the more experimentally validated surveys with randomization and different treatment groups, different control, exposure to a stimuli, take some measures and see whether we can determine causality. Similar questions we can answer in the lab, we can still answer online. With real incentives, we can observe people's choices and infer different things about what is driving behaviour and what determines choice, for example. But beyond that, there's so much more that you can do in an experiment that it becomes quite tricky to create it online where it's a perfect substitute. For example, when people are interacting with each other or just being in the room with other people can affect how you run experiments. And I have so many colleagues who have spent so many sleepless months up all night trying to code and learn new coding languages to code these really complex interactive experiments.
No, not exactly.
And yeah, it's just not easy. It's not an easy thing to do at all.
Well, with this absolutely awful introduction of online experiment building, how about we move on to the actual expert who can hopefully at the minimum just give us some good tips and the best option can just take all our worries away. I think that's a good way of introducing Jo, so let's dive into it. All right, so Jo, would you please introduce yourself to the audience? Who are you, what do you do, and how did you get into behavioral science?
Hi, thanks, Mel, for having me on your podcast. I'm Jo Evershed. I'm the CEO of the Gorilla Experiment Builder. We make software for behavioural scientists that want to take their research online quickly and easily so that they can do much larger studies with much larger power, so that they can do translational research, so that they can reach otherwise difficult to reach participant groups. So we're part of the solution space around making behavioral science more replicable by improving the experimental methods that are available to behavioral scientists who care about having the evidence to back up their suggestions.
All right, cool.
And hopefully they all do, right?
Hopefully.
Yes, I mean that's how you give them the tools, and then it's up to them to use them in the right way. But so I mean, obviously, being able to do online experiments, sort of increasing the access to do your own research, the impact, on paper is phenomenal. So obviously, it's a great idea. But how did it come about? How did you, start this company and this journey?
Yes, how I got into Gorilla was I was at UCL. I went back to UCL as a mature student with this idea around studying maths and cognition and developmental maths. And it turns out it's really, really hard to study developmental psychology, right? It's so hard. The logistical challenges of making a task, getting it into a school, getting the time from teachers to test them repeatedly to understand the development of cognition. It's not impossible, but it might as well be impossible.
Okay, great.
And so, and the researchers who are doing that sort of developmental studies, and I've worked with a few of them. Courtney Norbury is amazing. She's doing it on language. Brian Butterworth's been studying dyscalculia. They're doing phenomenal work, but in very difficult situations. And so it's really hard to get the body of evidence you want. So I was left with this challenge of how can we make it easier to get the data that we need to answer the questions that we want to answer so that we can improve the education that we really want to improve to make sure that no child gets left behind. Because that's, if for me, a lot of psychology is about impact. A lot of behavioral science should be about impact. They talk about this being the century of the brain, which I think it is. There's an opportunity here for experimental psychologists and behavioral scientists to have quite dramatic impacts on people's life and well-being, making sure that people have the right information in the right way to make the right decisions for them to live better, healthier, richer, more educated lives. But a lot of the times I find that the research is either stuck from developing to getting to the point it needs to be able to be recommended as policy or being recommended as an intervention. Or because the research is so hard, other researchers who would otherwise be interested in having impact are taking a step back and going, well, that's too difficult. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go and do something more esoteric. I might go into neuroimaging and understand where this is happening in the brain, but not really mind so much about the capacity for impact. And I understand those choices. I think those are valid choices, and everything they're added is useful to the literature. But I was, how these things just catch you, right? You don't know why you care about them. You just do.
Yes.
But I was caught with, could I help researchers by giving them the tools they need that would allow those that wanted to do this work and were motivated to do this work, make it easier for them, make it possible. So I ended up doing I left the maths thing behind for a bit because it was too challenging to recruit kids. I was at a TED conference of all things, and I ended up sitting next to the then director of the Science Museum, who was amazing. And I said, well, the thing that always, we were talking about what I loved about the Science Museum, because he likes to be like, what do you love about the Science Museum? I was like, well, it was the place where you got to go and play with things yourself, and you got to do real science rather than look up science history. And I think that's one of the things why psychology is always so exciting, right? You're as a first year undergraduate, you're there doing science for the first time. You're not learning science history. The thrill of discovering something that nobody has known before, and that you now know this thing to be true and have the evidence to back it up and can postulate why this might be. The joy. Anyway, so I was talking about that bit of psychology and running experiments. he was there and he was being very friendly. And I went, I don't suppose I could, have a little space at the Science Museum to run my psychology dissertation, because I really didn't fancy having to get people to come into the lab every day over 2 months. Instead, I kind of wanted to get my data a lot faster. And I thought having a booth at the Science Museum where everybody would come and take part in my task at a day was a better idea. And he said yes. so that was great. So I got lots of really
a
interesting
true patron
data.
of the sciences.
And that was a strange study about parent-child dyads, but it was fun. I've never published it because we didn't find anything interesting. It was an undergraduate dissertation. But I had to cobble something together on computers, and it's like, oh, this is a bit tricky. This should be easier.
Mm.
And I was finding it hard. And I had my boyfriend at the time was pretty tech savvy, so I was like, oh, this is a bit hard, and getting participants is a bit hard. So I'd had this really visceral experience of these 2 bits of the puzzle that were really hard. Now I think about then, Prolific had appeared, and they were fixing the one side of the problem, which is the participant sourcing. Mm-hmm. But nobody was fixing this other side, like better tools that were easier to use. And so that was the bit that got me. So we started off working on Gorilla, making really great tools. We showed them to UCL, and one of my old lecturers at UCL, Dan Richardson, who is the most phenomenal lecturer. If you ever have the opportunity to go to one of his lectures, I think he's doing one on consumer neuroscience sometime soon. Like, he's just so engaging.
I mean, with a topic like consumer neuroscience, could you possibly not be engaging? Come on, it's cool stuff, right?
It's true. But he's just phenomenal. And we got to work with him on one of his projects, which was like he's trying to understand how groups of people make decisions together in real time. So we built him his own little custom platform, which is like a multiplayer mouse tracking study where everybody's taking part on their device, but they see the screen of how everyone's behaving. It's brilliant. And fun. So we were working on that, and then I'd started talking to him about the idea of Gorilla, like make it easy, make it so everyone can do it. He'd been given the task at UCL at the time of getting first-year undergraduates actually making their own experiments and collecting data and integrating their research methods and stats course into an evidence and inquiry course. And I was like, yeah, if we make it, you can build your course around it, and you can really change the teaching of research methods at UCL and take it up a notch. Because Dan doesn't do courses where people give mediocre feedback on the course. Like, he's going to get an A star for the course that he delivers to his students. So it needs to be like engaging, life changing. So,
wow!
And he really is that good.
I mean, I'm just having flashbacks of like all the life-changing courses I've had in my life, and the only memories that come towards me are slightly PTSD triggering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably wasn't statistics and research methods, right?
No, funny that, yeah.
Actually, I still have nightmares of the course I was taught in R, so,
Yeah, that I could, yeah. I do remember being taught MATLAB and going,
oh no.
This should be easier.
Yeah, a little bit easier.
Yes.
And also, like, lots of people in my year as well, they were like, I came to study psychology, not computer programming.
Yeah.
If I'd wanted to study computer programming, this is not the course I would have picked.
Exactly.
Yes. It's a shock to the system. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get, like, it's a little bit piled on, isn't it? When you can come into a psychology degree thinking it's going to be about just the mind and the human condition, and having one really tough topic like statistics, which you need in order to build your evidence, and which is of course really important. I think you'd suck that up. But when you have to do like that and programming, and then there's the bits of biology or neuroscience that you might have to do as well, you can leave students reeling a bit, going, that's not quite what I had in mind. So and the variety is exciting. I think we do have to say the variety is exciting. So you can go in lots of different directions. Yeah. So Dan and I had this plan that we would work together to build Gorilla, and UCL would be our first client, and they've been our first client, and they've been using Gorilla now for 5 years, I think. And then once word got out, researchers were really quite excited. They were particularly researchers. It was really the language researchers early on who were very excited. and the auditory researchers who were very excited.
Why specifically them?
Well, partly because they discovered us,
Oh.
which I think is helpful. But I think language researchers, the reason why it was particularly exciting for them was it was easier for them to get the diverse samples that they needed of bilinguals, so people who had two languages, or monolinguals in one of those two languages. And so the need to take your experiment online was greater, and the gains from doing so were greater. And then for whatever reason, it was easier to get their papers published in papers, which is a challenge, because the people reading the paper could see the value of the research that had been done, and that it wasn't going to be possible unless it was taken online. So it was worth getting over that hurdle. And I think it was the same for auditory researchers, which was some of our early papers as well, reaching very particular groups, like people with Carl Jasmine has a paper on amusics, I think, so people who can't hear the pitch changes in voice. And so what happens to your interpretation of language if you don't hear the pitch changes, as well as people who do hear the pitch changes? So again, this was like the reviewers could see the value of being able to reach these niche groups, which would only have been possible by going online. And so it was worth tolerating concerns around not having done it in the lab. And then as those people had success, it got easier for other groups to follow and go, wait, like the research has been done online, the data quality is good, look, other groups are having success. Let's look at the value that this paper is bringing. And then now, of course, the pandemic means many, many more people are taking their research online.
Have you seen an explicit growth, like a massive just upshoot as soon as the pandemic hit in the use of Gorilla or any online platform?
Yeah, so I only have the stats on Gorilla, but yes, absolutely. So I think our team has had to go from 5 people to 13 in order to support the amount of research that is happening online at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Our lab has been closed now for a year. So if you do want to collect data, there's kind of no other way that you can go about it apart from going online and designing online experiments and surveys and, using Prolific, which is one of the main things I've been used to. Yeah. So, I mean, fantastic for you guys.
What's your research, Sarah? Can it not go online?
Yeah, no, it can. I mean, I was trying to do an RCT in the field, which just by construction doesn't quite work when you put it online. But I've really just, like many PhD students, have to pivot a little bit on the projects that I can actually do. And I've retailored a lot of my stuff now so that it is online, like with the caveat that maybe, initially we would try and design it for the lab, but we can still do it online. I think a lot of people are realizing this now. We sort of, the default was always, let's go to the lab. I think it's switching a little bit. People sort of go online first.
Yeah, and I mean, I think particularly for PhD students, the gains are gigantic. So I in the early days of Gorilla, somebody got in touch with me and said, I've been really struggling to put my study together in MATLAB or ePrime. I can't remember which one. I've been working for 3 months on it. It's still not there. It's still not doing what I want. Like, can you help? Like, maybe I should use Gorilla. I don't know. But like, maybe you won't be able to do it. And I was like, well, she happened to be in Cambridge. So we went to a coffee shop in Cambridge and sat down. I was like, well, show me your task. Let me have a look. And we had a look at it.
Well, you could still go to a coffee shop.
Back in the day.
The days.
Anyway, we built it together in 15 minutes.
Oh, cool. Dope.
Wow.
So that's amazing.
Yes, that's amazing.
So then it was done. Yeah. But at the same time, there was this sync. She's like, I have been working on this for 3 months.
That sunk cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That pain, that agony. I'm experiencing it right now and I can relate to it and it makes me feel sick to my stomach.
And PhD students overwork themselves. They work so hard. They often sacrifice their time with friends, their time with exercise, their time with family in order to put in all of this time. So, I mean, not only could the time have been better spent on research, but the time could be better spent on having a good life. Like, I'm a firm believer of you need to have a good life as well as a good career, right?
I'd love on that one. I'm with you. The welfare effects, just from the researcher side, I can. You're just telling me. I'm interested.
So that gets you from time saving in building your experiment, right? And then there's the time saved on the recruitment. So historically, if you're going to recruit 100 participants, that's going to take you, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. If you want to recruit 500 participants, that's more time, right? And so you're constantly making these trade-offs around data quality versus the time that you're going to put into it. And the alternative is you put it onto a recruitment platform. And there are many recruitment platforms out there. I know I've mentioned Prolific. MTurk is another one. But actually, every single jurisdiction has market research agencies. Market research agencies have existed for decades. You can approach them and get exactly the participants you want. They all work slightly differently at slightly different price points. But don't be put off. But my experience is with Prolific. So you can put a study online and have 500 responses over your lunch break.
Yes. I can vouch for that. I ran a study. I got 600 responses in 2 days, and I was made sure that I was online when the study was live. So that was my choice, not to leave it running. So that's why it probably took 2 days, but hours, literally hours to get those responses.
Yeah. And then you can go to the pub.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, I would love to go to the pub right now. I would love to go. Oh man,
I would love to go anywhere by this stage.
Yeah,
anywhere.
I mean,
anywhere, somewhere, see another human being, touch them, a real person.
I mean, even the challenge of getting cash into the lab, like you run a lab experiment and getting the right change and making sure you order the right amount and counting it out every time and not making a mistake, and even that, like being able to completely erase that from the equation of the things you need to do to run an experiment is hugely time saving.
Yeah, that's time saving. And then there's the safety aspect as well. I have heard horror stories of young female researchers collecting data outside of hours.
Yeah.
They're in a room, they're in a small room with a near stranger and have felt vulnerable or exposed, or things have happened which they wish wouldn't have happened. And like there's a safety aspect as well. Like if we can put it online, everyone is safe.
Right. No, that's true. Such an important point that doesn't get spoken about a lot at all. Like that doesn't get brought up.
I think it's uncomfortable to talk about it. Everyone wants to feel like nobody's made put anyone at risk. But of course, it's a risk. If you're asking somebody to come into your lab who's a near stranger, it's a risk.
And I guess personal experience,
Sure.
A lot of people may not have felt that vulnerability, based on their characteristics. And so if you're surrounded by people of a certain demographic, they may not even know to give you certain advice on how to stay safe because it just doesn't cross their mind.
It might not cross their mind. Yeah. Like never cross their mind that there's a duty of care here.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another reason for taking things online. Now, yeah. So I think those are some of the benefits. We've got some, there are exciting things coming in the future, which I think change.
Tell us more.
Should I talk about those?
Yes.
So I think stage one is, of course, taking current lab-based research, the things that people typically do in the lab, and putting that online and getting everybody comfortable with that. But once you can build really awesome tools that can take stuff online and do this online, there's a capacity to build new paradigms, new types of experiments that haven't done before, and make those available. So one of the things we've been working on is a Shopbuilder.
Oh, yes, thank you.
So it looks like Amazon, or looks like Sainsbury's,
Mm-hmm.
or looks like whatever you want it to look like. You upload your product list. You can change all the prices. You can put taxes in. You can put subsidies in. You can change the labeling. You can put in nudges. And now you can look at, can we change consumer behavior by any of these levers that we can pull? And
can I make a suggestion? Can I ask for another variable? Can you alter the payment method as well, please?
The payment method, so for paying for when they buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so one of the problems, so we can't fulfill the payment. So that's the bit that's weak, right? Like it can't do the fulfillment. So it's not completely. Well, you might be able to back it, right, on a small one. So somebody makes the purchase in your platform, and then you go and make the payment and set it to them. So that was an interesting challenge. One group has done that we built them a supermarket where people could buy food, and then they did the fulfillment in the back end with a research assistant who went and looked at the list of things that were bought and then went and bought them and got them shipped to the person, which is really cool.
Whoa, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
But so at the moment it doesn't have the notion of payment and paying different types of payment in there. But it's got all the other bits, and we think that could be a really useful tool for informing policy around particular types of purchase that have negative social consequences. So you can think about things like alcohol, cigarettes, high fat, high salt food, or high sugar food, depending on which camp you're in. And wouldn't it nice to have an evidence-based discussion about that?
That would be great.
You can think about you could have a think about creating interventions that don't only work on the rich middle classes, that work and benefit the people who often suffer the most. And so, there's a particular term for this. I can't but it needs to be done in a socially sensitive way. That isn't overly burdensome on the poorest of society. That's unfair.
Yes.
So that's one of the tools we've got coming. Another tool we've created is a game builder, make it much easier for people to gamify their tasks. So that because particularly when you're doing research on kids, you can't give them those boring tasks.
Even on adults, this still also holds.
Yeah, I was about to say, don't give me the boring task either. Give me the game. Come on, man.
Give me the fun game. I want the game. So gamifying tasks, making that really accessible, so that first year undergraduate psychology students can create a game that looks compelling and interesting, but they don't need the coding skills, and how that's going to change the quality of research that's coming out of behavioral scientists. I think that's really exciting as well.
I just remember a colleague of mine. We started the PhD together, and they had a lot of gamification in their PhD. Their methodology was based around it, and they coded everything up in Python, and it took forever, and it never did what it was supposed to be doing. And I mean, they quit the PhD in the end. So this definitely has an impact. This has way more of an impact than I think most people realize. Because if your methodology is constantly working against you, you're gonna give up in the end.
Yeah, one of my coaches says you can't grow into pain. If the thing you're trying to do causes you too much pain, you'll stop. You give up. Because you can't take on too much pain. You'll take on a little bit, which allows you to grow. But there's a limit.
Like R.
Like R acceptable. Python, no.
Yes.
So we've got the game builder, then we've got the journey builder is another one where you sort of upload a series of photos, and then people can walk around a scene. So you could use that for understanding navigation, or people can use it where it was used by a group to understand, again, purchasing decisions of where do people make this purchase decision, and who do they go and talk to in the shop to help make that purchasing decision.
Is this going to be something that's going to be compatible with VR, like virtual reality?
Yeah.
Is that going to be possible?
Ooh, I don't.
Or is that too next level?
It's not going to be VR this year. The one for this year is going to be still photos.
But there's always next year.
There's always next year, exactly. So maybe there will be VR navigation in the future. I think I need to look at how you create VR. There are ways that you take a camera and you scan a space to create a VR environment, and then you go and you scan it again. Those files are quite big. We need to make the engine that interprets that so that people can walk around it. And then you have to think about, so you can do all of that. And then you need to also think about the scientific value of that extra level of real world effect. Does that actually add to the quality of the data, or doesn't it? And the extent it adds to the quality of data, is it worth it? Is it worth the additional costs? And we don't know yet.
I guess you've also got the structural factors of you would need people to have access to VR headsets. And I don't know whether or not that's sort of trying to bring the lab into people's homes, and whether that's counterproductive in some sense, or you're only going to then be sampling a certain type of person with access to that technology, and we have the same problems again that we've seen with a lot of original sampling methods. So I mean, maybe we just need technology to advance.
Well, and it will, right? So if VR becomes absolutely commonplace and everybody has a VR headset, and then Prolific can ask people, do you have a VR headset, and can we can we put you, like, make you available for VR studies? And so then the whole pipeline is working together, right? The participants have the VR sets, there's the technology to run them, and the people who want to use it, that works again. But exactly as you say, it's the penetration. One of the benefits of going online is the large sample sizes, is the diverse sample sizes. And if you've now only got young, heavily into gaming, rich people, possibly men, but I think that's probably not the case if you actually look at the data, then you might have shot yourself in the foot.
Yep.
Yeah, unless you're particularly interested in asking a question to that specific group.
Yeah.
Then yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we always have to have quite, like, careful. You have to carefully deconstruct. It's like, oh, is this possible? It's like, well, maybe, but is it desirable? Even if it's possible, is it desirable? Is that the right yes. tools to give the research community? Or actually, is our time better spent creating a different tool that has wider application, will have a bigger impact on the research that we're trying to facilitate here? And my sort of an organizing principle I have around that is I want tools that have the broadest possible use, that can be used on the broadest number of people, and that are very accessible to everybody. So for me, there's a lot about democratizing that behavioral sciences for everyone, because I don't want to put back in these technological barriers when we've just been spending all this effort getting rid of them.
Absolutely.
That's so important and so fascinating to speak to someone who's, actually proactively trying to break down these barriers. I think, these are conversations that definitely need to be had. I mean, for you, what's the biggest barrier to democratizing behavioral science today that we all could be tackling right now, do you think?
Gosh, I have never been asked that question before.
Good job, Sarah.
Really good job. What's the biggest barrier to democratizing behavioral science at the moment?
It may be an unfair question because, there may be many.
I'm sure there are many. So programming was a big one. And certainly that's what I hear from our users, is they're like, before I found Gorilla, I was having to beg a more senior, often male, programmer to make my task for me. And this is not the case of all of them. I'm sure there are lots of them, but some of them were a bit shirty and condescending and made them feel crap about themselves and their abilities.
I would at this time like to shout out specifically Ty at the Warwick Business School for being an absolutely great sport when it comes to helping people program their fucking online experiments. So thank you very much, Ty.
Yeah, and there are ones who are absolutely brilliant, right? Who like take you by the hand, make you feel wonderful, like teach you what you need to know, like empower you. But that's not everyone's gift to empower other people. And
well said.
And I've certainly read threads online where they're like, like open science has even turned into a thing that is used like to beat people up. I'm a huge proponent of open science. I love the idea of open science, and we've made Gorilla as open as is possible. So you can sign up for free, use all the tools for free, like get it all to the point that you're absolutely convinced it's going to work. We've got Gorilla Open Materials where you can publish your stuff afterwards, so that when you're writing up your paper, you can describe the method as you would, but you can also go, here's a link, go and have a look, go and see for yourself exactly how it was done.
Yes.
And then somebody else can come and clone it and then go, like, it's replication time. I've already got a copy of your experiment and I never had to ask you for it. It's all there. All of your files are there, and I can just make the tweaks I want to do my extension or replication. So like I'm a big supporter of open science, but even open science has turned into something to beat people up. Like, why is it not like this? Why is it not like that? So so I guess where that's slowly rambling me to, what's the biggest drawback to democracy in like the democratization and the openness of behavioral science at the moment? I think it's like the silos deciding that theirs is the only way and everybody else is doing it wrong.
I see.
That resonates very deeply with
me.
Yeah.
Like, it's a huge subject and everybody has something to contribute. Right? Field studies have something to contribute. Online studies have something to contribute. Lab studies have something to contribute. Developmental work has something to contribute. The translational research has got something to contribute. The practitioners in the field doing it, implementing something, they've got something to contribute as well, because they're on the front line and seeing how the theory doesn't very easily turn into practice yet. And if we got better at talking to each other, those relationships would happen, so that the theorists could talk better to the experimentalists, who would talk better to the translationists, who would talk better to the practitioners, who would talk better to the policymakers. And that line of conversations really needs to get better.
A great answer to a very difficult question.
Yup.
To tip my cap to you.
Well,
I was like, I put you in the right state here.
Well, thank you for asking the question, and thank you for getting me there and allowing me to sort of slightly ramble around the edges until I realised what sort of my subconscious was trying to tell me. It's like, I do have a really good answer to this. I just, it's hidden somewhere.
I know exactly what Sarah means when she says that there's you can tell that people are continuously pushing you in the one right direction of how to do research, according to them, obviously, not according to us.
And that's never how you get anywhere. I used to work for like this big company, and their mantra was homogenous teams will outperform heterogeneous teams always, but in the short term, and they will in the short term. But in the long term, it's the diverse teams that outperform the homogenous teams. So you've got to make a decision. So sure, I'm sure your colleague is right. Like, if you do it my way, this way, the safe way, we will get to a result faster, which will have nice short-term gains. And that's great. But as a field, we're not after short-term gains. Like, science, public funded science should be trying to change, like, create the knowledge that changes the world. We're not after short-term gains. That's a long-term play. And a long-term play needs all the diverse voices coming together, sharing their little bit of the puzzle. You need that diversity of insight and approach and motivation. Is what's going to get us there. And all each of us can do is contribute our voice with authenticity and with kindness and with compassion, in a way that is helpful to the colleagues around them, so that the knowledge that we have gets there and can be heard by the audience.
A message of kindness and compassion. I think we all need that reminder sometimes. The world of academia can be incredibly cutthroat, savage, and just reviewing each other's work and criticism and fielding criticism and defending yourself. And I found it really difficult as a PhD student, in my faculty, to talk with people who disagree with the right research method, or would have a different opinion on how to approach answering certain questions. Everyone's, we've all been trained in similar backgrounds, and we all sort of approach this homogenous point of agreement. But yeah, I don't know. I guess, doing this podcast is me actively trying to step out and engage and talk to people who don't agree, because you can't see it sometimes. Your own confirmation bias gets in the way.
I think there's a real gift in learning to say something along the lines of like, I disagree with you completely. Isn't that exciting? Because I know what I know, and you know what you know, and we both must be right. And together, gosh, what's that going to be like? So, like, come in, please tell me exactly where you're coming from, because wow, I want to see what it's like to be in your brain. And then can we reverse it? And you could get into my brain, or whichever one was the other one. I've lost track now. And together we'll create a new understanding. We'll at least be able to understand each other's perspective, and then see what are the missing pieces of data that we each have, how we're seeing them, and how that extends both of our thinking. But we should learn how to have those dialogues of embracing profound disagreement as an absolutely exciting opportunity to really understand a different perspective, rather, and it's about how you say it, right? There's a world of difference between saying, I completely disagree with you, how exciting, versus you're completely wrong, you're wrong, which is often what you get on the receiving end. Yeah. And maybe that would be a useful like coaching course, I guess, for PhD students and academics is like, could we all learn how to give criticism in a way that has the effect we want it to have, which is to start a conversation.
No, I was going to say that little change, I think, would change so much about how people interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a great point. I love
We're all trying to do extraordinarily good research, right?
Yeah.
The goal is the same in the end. Yeah, we're united on that front, at least. But so I'm interested. Do you largely see that the type of people who use the platform to build experiments are firmly based within academia, or has there been some adoption of the experiment builder and sort of running your own experiments and testing theories outside of sort of the academic treadmill of reaching publication and stuff?
So I'd say at the moment, like, the vast majority of our users are academic, and that's because I understand the academic market so much better. I have relationships in the academic market. I know how to make that work. But what we're beginning to see is people leaving academia with the tools to run behavioral experiments, understanding that like, and now also with an understanding of the replication crisis. So they know that if they can't just apply the theory as it is to a new situation, like, that's not going to work. And so we're seeing behavioral scientists come to us and saying, right, I'm now in this organization and we're trying to achieve this end. And we'd like to run some experiments. We know what the levers are we want to pull, but we want to run some experiments. So between subject experiments, like maybe 8 different arms, optimizing the intervention that we've come up with to see which one's going to have the biggest impact. So because the theory tells us the levers, but we need to make it work in our particular setting. And we're seeing people start to do that in sort of in a range of different roles. So some in marketing, some in PR, advertising are the easiest ones to adopt it. Product design as well, like with the consumers, like this version of a product or that version of a product, like how, like which bit of product positioning is going to work best. Where else are we seeing? So it's very early days, but I think it's likely to be an arm that grows. Certainly for in industry, it's been really hard to date. Like, they've hired behavioral scientists, but then behavioral scientists are like, well, I know the theory, but I don't know how to do the programming of the task myself. And so I need a computer scientist as well. And then sometimes the behavioral scientist knows this, not the UCL course, which you do a lot of data science as well as part of your course. So there are good courses where you do the theory and the data science together, but there are still courses out there where you don't do them together. And so then those people would be like, oh, actually, I also need a statistician. So suddenly a company that's like, well, I hired a behavioral scientist because I thought they'd be able to add like behavioral science to my business. But actually it turns out I needed a computer programmer and a statistician as well. Gosh, that's quite a large budget suddenly. But I think with the change in the training and the change in the tools means that now can all be done by one person. And so I think we'll see that translation into industry happening more smoothly.
All right.
One of the things I love about the experimental method is it allows you to embrace ignorance as a strength. So rather than saying, I don't know, I can't do anything, it allows you to say, I don't know. Isn't that exciting? But I do know how to find out.
Yes, that's the key bit. Yes.
And so now you're putting behavioral scientists into that position when they go into industry of somebody going, well, could behavioral science tell us anything about this particular problem that we're having? It could be around recruitment, it could be around product, it could be around pricing. It's like, yes, I'm sure it can. Let me go and think about that and work out how I can add value here.
No, that is, I mean, apart from putting statisticians and computer scientists out of jobs, amazing. I mean, for someone maybe who hasn't had like the computer sciencey background or an experimentalist background, who may be still interested in running their own sort of mini experiments, could you explain what's the difference between running a survey and an experiment? Like, what's the difference between investigating something using sort of SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics and, what you can do in Gorilla?
Yeah, so like at one level, they're not very different, right? A survey is an experiment to some extent, but what you're getting is subjective data back. You're asking the human on the other side to interpret their response first and then tell you what they've interpreted for themselves. And of course, what people tell you isn't how they behave. That's the fundamental difference. So in Gorilla, what we're interested in is capturing behavior, not capturing self-reported responses. So if you wanted to find out, like, does this person prefer cats or dogs, you could show them, you could give them a sorting task for sorting cats and dogs, and then look at timing differences between how quickly they respond to things. You could, I don't know, you could measure, I mean, like, you could do a seed, like, so we've got this new tool, which is like it's coming soon. It's called Mouse View. It's been created by Tom Armstrong and Alex Irvin. I hope I've got their names right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Now I really feel I need to look that up, but I'm not going to, because that's not right. Anyway, so Mouse View, you'd put a scene in the background, and then it'd be occluded except for a little circle, right? And then you could see where they move their mouse. And if somebody who preferred cats to dogs would probably spend more time looking at the cats, or like find your favorite animal in this picture, and they spend their time, oh, is that? But like if they were hovering over the cats but not the dogs, and they were quickly moving on to the dogs, you'd be able to go, actually, they've made the decision to skip over the dogs and are only looking at the cats, and then are finding their favorite cat amongst the cats. So that's measuring behavior rather than measuring self-reported intention. So self-reported rather than self-reported methods.
Yeah, or even getting people to interact with each other. On a survey, it's one person answering a couple of questions. You know, something that you can do in the lab is you get people in a room and you say, work together as a team, or, you know, you're going to be the boss, you're going to be the employee, you know, in some sort of like structured setup, and see how people behave. Yeah. Like being able to do that online.
Very cool.
There's so many things that you can investigate.
Yeah, we don't yet have multiplayer in Gorilla. It is coming later this year, so I'm excited about that. But we're talking. Another thing, I hadn't mentioned that earlier. I'd forgotten. There's a group in Germany who we're working with who really want to take their 2-player games that look at exactly that, negotiations online, to see. But it just needs to be easier, right?
That's the sort of the punchline of the episode.
It just needs to be easier.
I think this is a pretty nice segue into just me asking you. So we've already heard a couple of new things that, you know, Gorilla is coming out with, which, you know, probably within this year or maybe the next. But if we take a slightly longer horizon, what do you think the future is for just the methodological applications of behavioral science?
I think the impact of behavioral science should be huge. And I think if we fail to deliver that, then we really have failed as a academic to industrial vertical. I think the behavioral science unit will become a unit in every single company, the same as your like marketing, finance, operations department. You'll have a behavioral science department that understands human behavior and how to shape it. I think we've got a new generation of employees entering the market who are fundamentally less interested in selling widgets for profit and want to sell value that makes people's lives better. And so the behavioral science unit would be around turning products from like maximizing the value to the consumer of a product, that it has enriched their lives by improving their health, wealth, happiness, or education. I think those are the 4 broad categories. And what I'd love to see in the future is that sort of PhDs, or at least an option in the future, it's not for everybody, but that some people doing PhDs will continue to be doing very academic PhDs with an intention of going and studying their subject in academia. But other people doing PhDs will be doing so because they have a clear vision of an improvement that they think they could bring and improve into the world. And their PhD would be that time where they develop a prototype of their intervention and test it and get the experimental data they need to hone it, and then are in a position to take that to angel investors or venture capitalists to go, okay, now how do I do the next bit? So I think there's opportunity for behavioral scientists to become big game changers, and make people's lives better. Because, that's one of the reasons I fell in love with behavioral science, is the people and the discipline of understanding people, understanding the behavior of people from a scientific perspective with the evidence to back it up, and the challenges we face in the world, from climate change, tax avoidance, bullying. These are behavioral problems.
Yep.
And if we can't change them, then, well, if we don't fix the climate change one, that's going to be a bigger problem. But some of the other ones still worth
That's
fixing.
incoming. No, that's a great, I think, sentiment really to remind ourselves, like, why are we doing all of this? Why spend so much time studying behavioral science if we can't impact or affect the way we approach certain problems and help change behavior for the better for everyone?
And I think that would be fun as a PhD as well, right? To feel that you're creating a career for yourself from the outset, rather than feeling that you're not quite sure where it's going. I'm often reminded of Sophie Scott's choices. I'm sure you know Sophie Scott. She's absolutely wonderful. But when she just chose her PhD, she decided to study the social value of laughter.
Fair play to you.
Yeah, so it's like a reminder to everybody that when you pick the topic that you want to get into, like, choose something that, like, you have choices of how it's going to enrich your life. And I think that's worth thinking of. There are lots of people doing really hard and difficult research with groups of people that are really suffering, and that's laudable and valuable, and I'm really grateful people do that. But I also know that there are a lot of PhD students out there who pick topics and forget about the impact that it's going to have on them to study a topic that's that hard. And I think having an honest conversation about the breadth of behavioral science and the breadth of the human experience, and we can research joy and laughter, and that these, and music, that these are really valuable aspects of the social condition to study as well, is probably useful for people to have that in their minds too.
Good note
that
to
was
end on.
Beautiful and poignant, and has filled me with so much hope for the future. And thinking about the possibility of approaching a PhD with that sort of thoughtfulness, I think that is where we should be heading. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that makes me really excited. So, I mean, the very last question we like to ask is, that if the listener, after listening to this episode, wants to know more about you and about Gorilla, and tracking all this wonderful progress and all these new advances you're going to be releasing very, very soon, where can they go and find out more?
So if you are a behavioral scientist in academia and you've got an experiment that you want to run and you want to take it online, the thing to do is to go to gorilla.sc, SC for science, and sign up. It's completely free to sign up. You then get an email saying come to our onboarding session on the next Wednesday, and go to that, and that will get you started that way. If, however, you are not one of those and you're not ready to run an experiment, and you just want to know more about behavioral science and online behavioral science, the place to go is beonline.research.sc. That's the conference that we run every June all about behavioral science online. And if you go to the 2020 videos, there's 11 hours of content on a wide range of different subjects. I know, right?
That'll keep you busy.
Yeah. So, and there's stuff on like memory, metacognition, data quality, auditory research, researching on kids, participants, teaching research methods to students, all sorts of different contents. And then go and see if there's something there, and you can hear from somebody other than me about what's possible. So I think those are two routes that people can take depending on exactly where they're sitting at the moment. And if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, I'm Evershed Jo, or on LinkedIn. Very happy to connect with people. Talking about behavioral science is not only my passion, it's also what I get paid to do. So that's wonderful, isn't it?
You won the lottery there. That's amazing.
I really did. I do thank the world every day, and also UCL, because UCL were definitely a big part of that journey.
Awesome.
Well, all the links to everything that you've said
Yep.
will be down below.
Okay.
Yes, we will link everything correctly and cohesively. Jo, thank you so much for making the time. I think it was a great conversation, and your enthusiasm is just a breath of fresh air. It's just great. There's
Oh,
hope for
thank you so
behavioral
much.
science yet.
Well, Merle and Sarah, it's been an absolute delight being interviewed by you. I really, really have enjoyed it as well. You're very, very good
Glad.
at doing this. I can see
Oh,
you've been
thanks.
putting a lot of work into this. I really enjoyed answering Merle's blog. I'm just tremendously impressed by both of you. And so, yeah, like, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for chatting with me. And I do hope we get to keep in touch because this has been fun.
Oh, you are most welcome, and we definitely will.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. Well, that was our conversation with Jo Evershed. Jo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. The work Jo's been doing with Gorilla and online experiments and opening up the opportunities for people to easily make and run really reliable and well-produced experiments is phenomenal. And I am in awe. Merle, how are you feeling about our conversation? What were the takeaways for you?
I mean, I think Jo and her team, obviously, because it's not just Jo, are doing God's work. Because I can still remember me just like trying to figure out JavaScript to make something work in Qualtrics. Now, I can barely do R. Well, I can do R, it's fine. But JavaScript is just like the online tutorials and the strangers that I needed, that helped me from Twitter, thankfully. And obviously the lab manager who I've already given a shout out. I think Ty is great. Like, I needed so much help to get like essential something which is rather simple in its core, just to get going. So I'm happy the initiative, like Gorilla is out there, because like there's just people like me who need help. Okay, like we're not here to become computer scientists. So with all due respect for computer scientists, because I think their work is like magic, but like I signed up to be a behavioral scientist, and that is a bit different. I always thought. So yeah, this to me is God's work. I think some of the developments she's mentioned. They're coming a shop experiment, very interesting on my behalf. I'm keeping an eye on that. The fact that they're designing multiplayers, I think, is really, really interesting. Obviously, gamification has always been a massive topic, so I'm glad they're looking at that. Like we said in the chat, we also want the fun game. It doesn't matter that we're 25 plus years old. We also want the game.
Indeed.
We don't want the survey. We want the game. I would like to have this really explicit so that people won't forget. But yeah, all of this stuff. There seem to be really exciting developments coming up for Gorilla, and I'm here and I'm happy to see it. And I hope that I'm glad UCL is such a firm supporter. I hope Warwick gets to be a support as well, because I think this would be good for this type of work we do as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought it was so interesting how Jo brought up the fact that there are so many benefits to making online experiments an attractive and accessible option for researchers. The obvious ones are about time spent, learning how to program an experiment just for that experiment, and then forgetting it all is not the most efficient use of your time sometimes. And just in general, the struggles that people have getting access to people who can help them program experiments. And we're not also lucky to have Ty or Jose, who is the lab manager at Nottingham, who I should also shout out to because he is phenomenal. And also the safety aspect, which no one has ever brought that up to me before. But when I literally think about it for 5 seconds, I'm like, yes, that is something that has crossed my mind. And I know that there has been a bit of a reckoning in science in general, and hopefully this will continue and will go on to have an effect, about doing field work. Not just in behavioral science, but just in general, and people being vulnerable, particularly to sexual harassment in the field, and not being protected. And it is such a horrible thing and such a waste of potential of all of these people within the field who could bring something amazing, but are being pushed out and don't feel safe to do research. So I thought that was an amazing thing. And it all bleeds into, I guess, this idea of the democratization of science, which I think we've touched on these sort of themes a little bit with Neela Saldana and some other of our previous guests. But, you know, the fact that breaking down these barriers to produce top quality research, replicable research, that is easy to build, but doesn't compromise any of that quality, that experimental control or good design, I think could only do wonders for the profession and for the application of behavioral science outside of academia as well as inside. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a big fan. I hadn't realized that there was such an open science aspect to Gorilla, which I think is great. So I didn't realize that as soon as you built an experiment, you could, share the whole lot of it, including the results, which I think is great, because that is definitely something which can rectify some of the issues within the replication crisis. Because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever, so recently with one of my collaborators, we're trying to replicate an experiment which was initially done in the 70s, which has a lot of replications in and of itself. And it is almost impossible with some of them, especially the older papers, to figure out what exactly they did. The materials no longer exist, but the description is also so vague. For some of these papers, and I thought it was baffling, I couldn't even figure out what the exact sample size was. You'd think that's pretty basic, but you just can't figure it out. So I think this type of stuff will help loads with replication and the openness of science, of which I am a massive proponent. Just like you said, it makes access to different types of people so much easier, because in this day and age, and this might be very Western and very privileged, but most people have at least a smartphone or some type of a working laptop, PC type stuff thing, or can find access to one, even if you're in a public library, they have computers. They can connect to the internet and they can participate, in these types of experiments. So it makes accessing people a lot easier, and as a result, it makes accessing a wide variety of people a lot easier. And I think that's something that is getting really, really important in behavioral science, because we've seen the issues with weird. We've discussed it with multiple people on this podcast already. Elina Hallon specifically really stands out to me. But this is becoming a problem. Absolutely. You can't keep testing undergrads. Like this is not how we're going to get there. So I'm really happy with all of this. I'm really happy, with Gorilla as it is. I'm really happy with Jo and her team, but I'm also really happy with what they stand for and what they're propelling forth into behavioral science. I really am.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, it's not the case that just because now we have access to fantastic online experiments and online samples, that we shouldn't be investing in labs in non-Western countries, in the global south, in those universities. And I think that's something that actually still needs to happen for us to actually fulfill this ideal of democratizing behavioral science, and also improving the discourse and the conversation between the West and the global South. For example.
Absolutely. I mean, I know, very interesting for the listener, that when it comes to field versus lab studies, Sarah and I have very different opinions, which is also driven by the methodologies that we actually apply. But even given that I'm 100% in like the field camp, if you will, I can recognize the advantages and the benefits from running a lab study, and I recognize the value. And even though I'm 100% field, I have absolutely no desire to suddenly wipe out the entire lab study culture. So just to clarify,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Just to clarify this, our support and our just our happiness with the fact that this online field type experiment is growing is obviously not because we are against labs. Just to have that clear, we propose a very balanced behavioral science in which all methodologies get the credit that they deserve, because there are disadvantages and massive advantages to most methodologies that we have in behavioral science, and those should be equally recognized. Nice disclaimer.
Very well said. Very well said. And I think with that, we will end there on that very positive, good, clear disclaimer. And just to say thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you to Jo so much for your time, and of course, all of the work you and your team are doing. We are so here for you. We are huge fans, cheerleading you all the way. And to the listener, all links to Jo and Gorilla will be down below. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it entertaining, helpful, useful, or maybe it just helped you pass an hour of your day. And so that's also valuable. Stick around. There's much more to come, more conversations to be had. So yeah, you'll hear us in the next episode.
Have a lovely week. And hope to see you next week. Bye.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love, you're the one I wanna give to. Things that